Good evening, bonjour and welcome. My name is Alexandra Gillespie and I have the privilege of serving as Vice President of the University of Toronto and Principal of UTM. Welcome everyone to tonight's Michael Berchie Tribute Lecture. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge that I greet you this evening from UTM, which stands on the traditional lands of the Wendat and the Seneca, on the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The campus looks out over the Credit River, so called by French and British colonists because at the river's mouth they traded goods on credit with Indigenous peoples who had travelled and stewarded these waters from time immemorial. The river has an Eastern Ojibwa name, Mississauga, the Trusting Creek, which is echoed in UTM's motto, Tantum Nobis Creditum, so much has been entrusted to us. Tonight, we have come together to remember and honour a wonderful young man whose life and potential was cut tragically short, Michael Berchie. On Monday, February the 8th, 2021, Michael, a UTM graduate from 2020, was torn from his family as a victim of senseless gun violence. Today's event will pay tribute to Michael's life as a son, brother, grandson, cousin, friend, and as a member of the U of T Mississauga community. Through this tribute to Michael, we will be raising awareness about the important issue of gun violence and its impact on victims and their families. As principal, I want to express my deep gratitude to Michael's family, Samuel, Victoria, George and Yvonne, for allowing UTM to honour him through this event. It's my hope that this tribute lecture will both celebrate his memory and create a space for conversation and action around the critical issue of gun violence. I do wish that we could gather together in person, but you will be able to share your comments and memories in a live chat during this event. Today's program will consist of remarks by Professor Rhonda McEwen, Vice Principal, Academic and Dean of the University of Toronto Mississauga, who will be speaking on behalf of the UTM community about Michael as a classmate, student and alumnus. We'll then hear from Kuda Chiromo, a student in his final year at York University. Kuda was a close friend of Michael's and will be speaking on behalf of Michael's family, friends and community. And finally, we will hear from Professor Dexter Voisin, former Dean of the Factor in Wentosh Faculty of Social Work and the Sandra Rotman Endowed Chair in Social Work here at U of T, now the Jack, Joseph and Morton Mandel Dean in Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. I'll now call on Professor Rhonda McEwen.
Thank you, Professor Gillespie. I would also like to offer my appreciation to Michael's family for allowing us to pay tribute to him this evening, while also raising awareness about an important issue in our society. On a personal note, I was devastated when I learned of Michael's tragic passing in February of 2021. I was sad, but I was also angry and shaken that someone with so much life and so much promise could be taken away from his family, his friends, and his community at such a young age. Michael is remembered at UTM as a dedicated student who always showed so much kindness and respect towards his professors and his classmates. He had been looking forward to a promising future in accounting and was on a path to become a CPA. You could always count on Michael to arrive on time to his classes, sitting in the same spot and ready to learn. Michael is remembered as being structured, inquisitive, and hardworking. Someone who always came to class prepared and engaged, ready to ask questions and seek guidance. There was never a problem that Michael couldn't solve, and he would pride himself on figuring out the most efficient way to get things done. I've heard that there was one course in particular in economics that many students struggled with, but Michael, with his incredible determination, figured out the key to success in that class. And rather than keep that knowledge to himself, he shared it with his fellow classmates so that they could all experience success. That's just the type of person he was. Kind, generous, and always striving to achieve and encouraging others to do the same. On behalf of the University of Toronto Mississauga's faculty, staff, students, alumni, and librarians, I want to say how proud we are to call Michael an alumnus. His time with us was all too brief, and he is greatly missed.
Thank you, Professor McEwen. During his life, Michael was more than a student and an alumnus. He was a loving and cherished son, brother, grandson, cousin, church member, and friend. In grade 5, Michael met Kuda Chiromo when Kuda had just moved to Canada from the US, and they remained friends. Kuda is currently a fourth-year student majoring in political science at York University, and he is here tonight to tell us about Michael's life outside of school, his family, friendships, community involvement, and aspirations. I would now like to invite Kuda to join us.
Thank you, Professor Gillespie. I first met Michael in elementary school. I was a new kid who had just recently moved from the United States, so I didn't know anyone at the time. It was grade 5 of Miss Yacobachi's class, and Michael came up to me and introduced himself, asking if I'd like to join him and his friends in playing soccer. During the first moments of recess, he introduced me to his other friends, and we were inseparable ever since. That was Michael in a nutshell. Someone who always led with genuine intentions and was open to everyone. As the years went by, our bond grew stronger, and that friendship turned into a brotherhood. Michael was someone I knew I could depend on. Someone who was always looking out for my best interests. I had the pleasure and opportunity to view Michael through many lenses during his life. As a student at UTM, Michael knew the importance of acquiring an education. He allocated the majority of his time to doing the best that he could in all of his courses. I was one of the recipients of his tips for success in the economics course that Professor McEwen mentioned earlier. He was very proactive and found a way to capitalize on every situation that UTM had to offer. As a brother and son, Michael would always look out for his family. Whatever was requested of him, he would try his best to make everyone happy. Whether it was running errands for his parents, helping his brother fix things around the house, or even helping his dad with working out, he would always lend a hand without any complaints. As a friend, Michael was someone I could always depend on. He was always looking out for me. If you knew Michael, you remember him as someone who would always tell it like it is, not sugarcoating anything he felt in his spirit. I remember discussing all of this with my other friends and laughing at some of the things he used to tell us and the bluntness in his tone. We joked that if you didn't argue with Michael at any point in time, you weren't really his friend. Michael will always have a place in my heart as someone who inspires me to keep going, to push for more, and be selfless in my actions. The lessons that he has taught me, both directly and indirectly, will never be forgotten. And for that, I am forever thankful to have shared moments with him throughout his time here. He will forever be missed.
Thank you so much, Kuda, for sharing what a genuine and thoughtful person Michael was. Our final guest tonight is Professor Dexter Voisin, the former Dean of the Factor and Wentosh Faculty of Social Work here at U of T, and now the Jack, Joseph and Morton Mandel Dean in Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. Professor Voisin will be speaking about gun violence and its impact on innocent victims and their families. Welcome, Professor Voisin.
Thank you, Professor Gillespie, for that introduction. And my thanks to the Berchie family for the opportunity to speak on such an important, difficult, and nuanced topic. I remember when I heard the news of Michael's passing. I was then Dean at the Factor in Wentosh Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto, and this news rocked the entire university community. But I know the shock pales in comparison to the trauma and pain that was felt by the Berchie family and all Michael's loved ones. So my condolences go out to all of them. Today, I'm going to speak for a few minutes on gun violence in Canada, what lies beneath. So we all know the headlines. 3 men charged with first-degree murder after 23-year-old Brampton man shot in Toronto. But there were other headlines that did not make the news. A young man, 23 years old, full of promise, who graduated from the University of Toronto, Mississauga, with a degree in commerce. Full of promise, and a bright future, an innocent bystander whose life was snuffed away by senseless gun violence, a brother, a cousin, a beloved son. There are other victims, innocent victims, whose headlines become part of the tapestry of Michael's story. 4 dead in targeted shooting. Shooting at NBA championship celebration injures 4 people. At least 7 injured in a nightclub. 3 killed, 2 injured in shooting at Airbnb. Many folks looking at these headlines would assume that this captures incidences in the United States. In fact, these headlines refer to victims of gun violence in Toronto and in other urban spaces across Canada. The rates of gun violence in Canada is surprisingly high compared to other industrialized countries. So after the United States, which is the highest among all industrialized countries, Canada is number 4. And statistics indicate that these rates are increasing. So many folks ask, what is the reason for this uptake of gun violence in Canada? Well, it's complicated. Gun ownership in the United States is highest among all industrialized countries. Out of every 100 Americans, almost 88 persons own some type of licensed guns. In Canada, that rate is not that far behind. For almost every 100 Canadians, almost 31 households owns guns. And when we compare this to the United Kingdom, this rate drops down to 6 individuals per 100. So gun ownership and access to guns in Canada, though regulated, is excessively high. But I want to pivot the story and talk about not just Michael being an innocent bystander of gun violence, but also pull behind the curtain and look a little bit deeper. And I took the subtitle for this talk from a 2000 movie with Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer, which is entitled What Lies Beneath. And the premise is that what we see with the naked eye just captures a small portion of what is actually taking place. So in tribute to Michael, I want to talk a little bit about not just Michael's story, but the story of countless other young Black males who are living in Canada. So Michael's story is very well known, an innocent bystander shot by senseless gun violence. But I want to talk about other victims of violence whose lives are also being shortened and eliminated by other types of dangerous bullets. So I quote here an African philosopher that says, until the lions have their own histories, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I want to talk about the 2 Canadas, Canada the beautiful, as well as Canada the violent. I want to talk about the broad historical, political, economic, and racial factors that shape the construction, concentration, and narratives of Black Canadians. Now, folks would say, why the focus on Black Canadians, and in particular, anti-Black racism? Some may rightly inquire, within the midst of so many diverse types of social inequalities within Canada, sexism, ableism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, and so on, why seemingly privilege anti-Black racism? To our fellow learners, we say that all these various forms of marginalizations are lacerations to the soul and injuries to the human spirit. However, they are not all experienced in the same way. Gun violence, though prevalent in Canada, is experienced at a higher rate by racialized individuals and those that are Black and those that are male, who carry a higher burden of gun violence. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons responsible for that. So although all individuals who are non-white experience some form of disadvantage, the advantage of white skin offers cover and protection for individuals who are white and share marginalized identities. So poorer Canadians and poorer racialized individuals experience higher rates of gun violence. Youth in general experience higher rates of gun violence than older individuals, but youth of color, and in particular Black youth, bear a higher burden of gun violence. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Some of the factors, the social factors that drive the disproportionate burden of gun violence on racialized families, and in particular Black families and their loved ones. Factors such as racism, economics, classism, and cumulative disadvantage. So I want to use an illustration to signify what cumulative disadvantage looks like. The impact of social isolation, the impact of housing segregation, and the impact of discrimination. So this is an experiment of fleas in a glass jar. And I'm told that fleas have the ability to jump 18 inches. But if you were to put fleas in a glass jar and put a lid that is 8 inches high and leave those fleas in there for 3 days, guess what happens when you take the lid off? The fleas, though having the capacity to jump 18 inches, will only jump 9 inches. And what is surprising, not only would those fleas jump 9 inches, but when they reproduce, their offsprings would also jump only 9 inches. And this is the impact of racism, social disadvantage, and cumulative disadvantage. Not only does it impact a particular generation, but it impacts successive generations. So Michael overcame many of these challenges and attended one of the premier academic institutions, not just in Canada, but in the world. He overcame aspects of racism, social disadvantage, in order to forge a path forward for him. But senseless violence again took away an innocent life. I want to talk about all the other individuals like Michael, whose lives are being taken away by the bullets of discrimination, the bullets of unfair social policy, and the bullets of housing segregation. So poverty in Canada, and especially in a city like Toronto, is becoming more racialized. Poverty is not only sexist, but is also racialized. So racialized and immigrant women both experience poverty at higher rates, with 20% more immigrant women and 28% more visible minority women living in poverty. And this is not just poverty for racialized and immigrant women, but it's also poverty for the offsprings and the children of those families. People of color bear a higher burden of poverty relative to their white counterparts. A 2011 study indicates that on average, Black Canadians earn 75 cents for every dollar a white person earns in Canada. In another research study carried out in December 2019, many racialized Canadians experience racism in some form or the other, and more than half of the Black respondents stated that they had experienced racism or discrimination due to race or ethnicity in Canada. Most respondents, almost 75%, acknowledged that they were aware that racialized Canadians experience discrimination either more or less frequently. So again, racism is another bullet that is limiting the lives and limiting the potentials of many Black Canadians. This is a bullet that Michael survived in terms of moving beyond the limits of racism. Housing discrimination. This is a report speaking of housing discrimination and spatial segregation in Canada. So compared to the United States, the level of housing segregation index in Canada is similar to that of Minneapolis, St. Paul, where Mr. George Floyd was murdered. So again, we think of Canada as a land of opportunity, and it is for so many individuals. But the level of social and systemic racism is prevalent in Canada, similar to that in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We look at the rates of Black and Aboriginal children in foster care. Again, Black children, individuals from the Caribbean and African descent, in addition to Indigenous children, bearing a higher burden of overrepresentation in the Canadian child welfare system. According to Statistics Canada, police reported 1,700 criminal incidences motivated by hate in Canada in 2018. A significant portion of these hate crimes, 44%, are related to race and ethnicity, targeting the country's Black population. So again, over-policing, not only in the child welfare system, but also in the criminal justice system. Michael's untimely demise, his life being taken away from us. And this presentation reminds us that in a real sense, all lives are interrelated. All men, according to Dr. Martin Luther King, are caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. It is important for me to become all that I can be unless you become all that you can be. COVID-19 has brought this into sharp focus. It's reminded us that we are all brothers and sisters. All our lives and all our futures are interconnected. If we ignore the disease burden of COVID and other types of social inequalities in some communities, then we are all impacted by that. Likewise, if we ignore racism, we ignore structural inequality, which we create. If we ignore and perpetuate housing segregation and discrimination, then we are all impacted by that violent cancer. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and I want to thank the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and the Berchie family again for organizing this tribute to Michael. I'm so honored to have been invited to speak. I'll now pass it back to Professor Gillespie to close this event. And in so doing, I'd like to say to Michael Berchie, may you rest in power and in peace.
Thank you so much, Professor Voisin, for that illuminating lecture on this important and tragic topic. As we approach the end of tonight's event, I'd like to take a moment to thank Michael's family for their strength, their grace, and their generosity for allowing us to have this event in Michael's memory. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I encourage you to share this lecture and continue the discussion about gun violence here in Canada. Thank you. That concludes the Michael Berchie Tribute Lecture. I wish you all a good night.